The snow had been falling since noon, the kind that doesn't announce itself with wind or thunder, just a quiet, steady weight that settles over a town until every sound feels muffled and far away. By 6 in the evening, Bozeman was wrapped in white. The street lights along Main Street glowed like small orange moons through the falling flakes, and the mountains that usually stood sharp against the sky had disappeared entirely, swallowed into a gray nothing that pressed close to the rooftops. Inside the Copper Spoon, a small family restaurant tucked between a hardware store and a shuttered bookshop, the windows had fogged over from the warmth inside meeting the cold outside. The diner was nearly empty. Only 3 tables were occupied, and the waitress, an older woman named Dot, who had worked there longer than most of the regulars had been alive, moved between them without hurry, refilling coffee cups and asking after people's mothers and knees. At a corner booth near the window sat Ethan Brooks and his daughter, Lily. This was their table, had been for 2 years now, ever since Ethan realized that Thursday nights were the hardest ones to get through alone, and that if he filled them with something steady and small, they became bearable. Thursday dinner at the Copper Spoon. Lily always ordered the same thing, grilled cheese cut into triangles and a hot chocolate with 2 marshmallows, and Ethan always ordered the meatloaf, though he rarely finished it. They had started coming here back when Sarah was still alive, in the last year before the cancer took the strength from her voice and then everything else. She used to sit right where Lily sat now, laughing about something small, some story from her day at the elementary school where she taught, and Ethan would watch her across the table and think that this, exactly this, ordinary and warm and unremarkable, was the thing he wanted more of than anything. He got 5 more years of Thursdays with her before the aggressive kind of cancer, the kind the doctors said didn't leave much room for hope, took her from him and from Lily, who had been 3 years old and too young to understand why her mother stopped coming home. 5 years had passed since then. Ethan was 38 now, still worked 12-hour shifts as a paramedic, still came home some mornings with his hands shaking from things he'd seen and couldn't unsee, and still found a way to be at this table every Thursday with his daughter because it was the one appointment he refused to let grief cancel. Lily was 8 now, all elbows and gap-toothed smile, with her mother's dark eyes and a way of noticing things that unsettled adults sometimes. She noticed when Dot's knees hurt worse than usual. She noticed when her father hadn't slept. She noticed things that most people, moving fast through their lives, simply walked past. That night, she noticed the woman by the window. Claire Bennett sat 3 tables away, alone, a bowl of tomato soup cooling in front of her, untouched. She was 34, though grief had aged her in the particular way it does, drawing something tired and hollow around the eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She was a pediatric nurse, had been for 11 years, the kind of nurse that scared children trusted immediately because she never rushed and never lied to them about how much a shot would hurt. She was good at her job because she had always been good at sitting with pain without flinching from it. She was not good, it turned out, at sitting with her own pain. 2 weeks earlier, she had buried her younger brother, Danny, 26 years old, killed on the interstate outside of Livingston when a semi-truck jackknifed in the ice and there had been nowhere for his car to go. Danny had been the last piece of her immediate family. Their parents were long gone, their father to a heart attack when Claire was in nursing school, their mother to a stroke 3 years back. Danny had been the one who still called her every Sunday, who still made her laugh, who still made her feel like she belonged to someone. Now there was no one left to call. She had come to the Copper Spoon that night for the same reason she had started going to grocery stores at odd hours and taking the long way home from work. She could not stand her apartment. The silence in it had a shape now, a presence, and she would rather sit in a diner surrounded by strangers than go back to it one more lonely night. But she hadn't touched her soup. She sat with her coat still on, staring through the fogged glass at the snow falling under the streetlight, and in her hand, hidden beneath the table where no one could see, she held a folded funeral program gone soft at the creases from being opened and closed too many times. Tears slipped down her face without any sound at all. She had gotten good at crying quietly. It was a skill grief teaches you quickly if you don't want to be noticed. But Lily noticed. She had been watching the woman for several minutes, her grilled cheese growing cold on her plate, her small brow furrowed in the particular way it did when she was working something out. Finally, she set down her sandwich and tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, leaning close so only he could hear. "Look at her. She looks like she forgot what smiling feels like." Ethan glanced over and something in his chest tightened. He recognized it instantly, that specific kind of stillness in a person's shoulders, the stillness of someone trying very hard to hold themselves together in public. He had seen it on the faces of family members at accident scenes, that particular architecture of grief being carried silently. "Baby, we don't know her," he said gently. "She might just want to be alone." Lily considered this with the seriousness only a child can bring to a small moment. "Nobody wants to be alone like that," she said. "Can we borrow her for dinner, just for a little bit?" The words stopped something in Ethan's chest, some old ache surfacing. He thought of Sarah, of the hospital room in her final weeks, of how she used to say that the whole reason for living was to make sure people didn't have to carry things alone. He looked at his daughter's earnest face and then back at the woman by the window and felt his own courage gather slowly, the way it does before you do something a little frightening and a little necessary. He stood, smoothing his jacket, and walked the short distance between the tables, feeling suddenly aware of how loud his own footsteps sounded against the quiet. "Excuse me," he said softly, and the woman startled, wiping quickly at her face, composing herself with the practiced speed of someone who has had a lot of recent practice. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Ethan. This is my daughter Lily." He gestured back toward the booth. "We're just having our Thursday dinner, and, well, my daughter noticed you sitting alone, and she wanted to know if you'd like to join us. No pressure at all if you'd rather not. I just didn't want you to think nobody saw you." For a long moment, Claire said nothing. She looked at this stranger, this tired-eyed man with kindness written plainly across his face, and at the little girl watching her from the booth with an expression so open and unguarded that it nearly undid her. She thought about saying no, about the version of herself that would have said no even a month ago, before grief had hollowed her out and left her too exhausted to keep performing fine. Something in her simply couldn't say no. Maybe it was the child's face. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending. Maybe some part of her, some old innocent part that hadn't yet given up completely, wanted so badly to be seen that it overrode everything. She nodded. They moved her bowl of cold soup to their table, and Dot, without being asked, brought a fresh one, hot this time, along with a basket of bread, and quietly disappeared to leave them to it. At first, conversation was clumsy the way it is between strangers, small and careful. But then Lily, unbothered by any of the usual adult rules about what you don't ask people you've just met, looked at Claire with her mother's dark eyes and asked, "Why were you crying?" "Lily," Ethan started, embarrassed, but Claire held up a gentle hand. "It's okay," she said, and found to her own surprise that she meant it. She looked at the little girl for a long moment. "I lost my brother 2 weeks ago. Car accident." "Was he your only brother?" "He was my only family," Claire said, and the words, once out, seemed to loosen something that had been wound too tight inside her for 2 weeks straight. My mom and dad are gone too. He was all I had left. Lily considered this with the same seriousness she'd given the earlier question. That's really lonely, she said simply, without pity, just a fact, the way children state things. My mommy died too. I don't remember her that good, but Daddy says she used to sit right where I'm sitting. Claire's eyes filled again, but something about the tears felt different this time, less like drowning and more like release. No therapist, no coworker, no well-meaning friend had asked her these questions so plainly in 2 weeks. Everyone else had tiptoed, had said the careful things people say, had asked how she was holding up in tones that expected the answer, fine. This child asked as if grief were simply a fact of weather, something to be acknowledged and sat with rather than managed. He used to call me every Sunday, Claire said, surprising herself with how easily it came. Just to talk, about nothing really. The weather, his job, some show he was watching. I used to think it was such a small thing. Now I'd give anything for one more of those calls. What was his name? Danny. Danny, Lily repeated, testing the shape of it, the way she did with words she wanted to remember. I'll remember him, even though I never met him. Is that okay? Something broke open in Claire's chest, gently, not violently, the way ice breaks in spring rather than winter. She laughed then, a small, surprised sound, the first laugh she'd managed since the funeral, and in the very same breath she began to cry. Real tears this time, not the careful, hidden kind, but something honest and unguarded. That's more than okay, she managed. That's the kindest thing anyone said to me in 2 weeks. Ethan reached across the table then and, without quite planning to, told her about Sarah, about the aggressive cancer that had moved through his wife faster than any of the doctors expected, about the 5 years since, about how he had learned that grief doesn't ever really leave, it just changes shape, becomes something you carry differently over time. People want to tell you it gets better, he said quietly, like there's some finish line. I don't think that's true. I think what happens is you get stronger around it. The grief stays the same size, but you grow bigger around it, so it takes up less of you. He glanced at Lily, dozing now against the booth's cushion, worn out from an evening of feeling and understanding more than most adults manage in a week. And sometimes, if you're lucky, somebody comes along and carries a little piece of it with you, not to fix it, just so you're not carrying all of it alone. Claire looked at this stranger, at his daughter asleep against his arm, at the fogged window and the snow beyond it, and felt something in her chest that she hadn't felt in 2 weeks, the sense of being tethered to something again, of not floating entirely alone in the dark. I only came here tonight because I couldn't stand another night alone in my apartment. I've been doing that, going places just so I don't have to sit in that silence. I didn't expect... She gestured helplessly at the table, at the two of them, at the warmth of it. I didn't expect this. Nobody ever does, Ethan said, and there was something in his voice, some old understanding that told her he knew exactly what those silent apartment nights felt like. By the time they left, snow still falling steady and soft under the streetlights, Lily was fully asleep in her father's arms, her small face peaceful in a way that made something ache pleasantly in Claire's chest. Standing in the doorway of the Copper Spoon, watching them, Claire found herself whispering, more to herself than to them, "Tonight you didn't just feed me dinner, you reminded me I still belong somewhere." Ethan smiled, shifting Lily's weight gently against his shoulder. "Same time next Thursday?" he asked, and it wasn't really a question at all, more an offering, a door left open. Claire nodded, unable to trust her voice just then, and watched them walk out into the snow toward their car, the porch light catching the flakes as they fell. The following Thursday, she came back, and the one after that. Coffee turned into dinners, and dinners turned into a standing chair at that same corner booth, one that Dot began setting a place for without being asked. Weeks became months. Claire, who had spent so long being the strong one for other people's children in the hospital, learned slowly what it felt like to be gently, patiently cared for herself. She learned Lily's favorite books, learned the particular quiet that settled over Ethan after a hard shift, learned that grief shared really does become lighter, exactly as he'd said, not because it shrinks, but because you're no longer alone underneath its weight. Birthdays came. Holidays came. The corner booth at the Copper Spoon became something like an altar to all of them, a place where three broken people had somehow, without ever planning to, become something whole together. Years later, when people asked Claire about the happiest chapter of her life, about the little girl who called her something more than a friend now, about the man who had become the center of her life in ways she never could have predicted on that snowy November evening, she always told them the same thing, the truth of it settling in her chest like something sacred. The happiest chapter of my life, she would say, began because an 8-year-old little girl refused to let a stranger eat alone. And somewhere in that telling, she always thought of the snow falling outside the fogged window, the cold bowl of soup, the folded funeral program she no longer needed to carry, and the small, warm hand of a child who had looked at her pain and simply, without hesitation, decided to sit beside it. Because sometimes miracles don't arrive with sirens or speeches or dramatic rescue. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the shape of a child's kindness, noticing the person everyone else had learned to walk past. Loneliness, she had come to understand, is often invisible, but kindness, real kindness, never is.